What's up, everybody? My name is Kevin Toppenberg. I think we have a good show for you today. We're going to work on the x-axis, which goes left-right, and the y-axis, which goes in and out. And we're going to be getting the lead screw connected to the nuts and put into the nut holder. And all of the struggle we have is getting that working right. My COVID is almost over. I've finished my 5 days of isolation, and I'm now in the 5 days of masking, and I think I have 2 more days to go in that. You know, I had gotten a little bit complacent about COVID. Most of the people I've been around that have had COVID really didn't get that sick. Honestly, I probably didn't get that sick either. I just felt miserable, felt sorry for myself. But my family had gotten their COVID boosters. I did not. Guess who got sick and guess who didn't? They've all remained healthy. I will clarify, I've had 3 COVID vaccines. I just didn't get the latest booster. That's what this channel's all about anyway, isn't it? Just learning from my mistakes. Okay, we're gonna get the y-axis back together. I've cleaned up my lead screw. I don't see much wear on there. I haven't actually measured it. Let me do that. Okay, when I measure out here, of course, the deeper I go into the thread, the wider it is. But it looks like about 75 thousandths. Or maybe 70 thousandths there. If I go to the middle, like 60, 162, so maybe down 10 thousandths. I think that'll be all right. All right, I'm gonna start with these nuts. I couldn't reach in through there to set them, so I had to take the nut back out. And each of these keys has a little plug. This one up here, I don't know if you can see it, there's still the plug sitting there, so the key kind of sets over that. I cannot see a place for a hole to go, so I don't quite understand that. I'm gonna have the plug facing in towards the middle, which means I'm going to put one nut in first, and I can see where this one had the screw up against it, so I'm gonna put this one in. It shouldn't matter which way it goes. Slide that all the way in, and then I'm going to put the key in and then the second one. I can't do that with my hands on the phone, so I got to put this down. Okay, so this is being a little ornery, so I had to disconnect the oil lines and bring it back over here to the bench. I can't get that to slide down in there smoothly, so I'm going to, and plus it's rotated just a little bit. This is a old brass part, that's not part of the mill. I'm gonna put this in. I don't feel any burrs. I think it just wasn't going in straight. Now come on, it's rotated again. And there is no burr from where I drilled the hole for the oil, at least that I can feel. Okay, that time it went all the way in. All right, then the second one will go in. Okay, so it's gone from the one into the other. All right, now I need to put the tensioning screw in. And then the tighter I push these 2 nuts together, the tighter it will be on the thread and take out backlash. Feels pretty good there. Then you put the set screw in, this little screw here which comes down on top of that and keeps the other one from backing out. I think I'm going to use just a little bit of blue thread locker on this. All right, this is Loctite 401. That on there. This all over my fingers, makes my fingers stick together. Very nice. All right, that's good. Now I can back this out. It goes back in. I'm going to do the other one as well for the x-axis. I'll bring you back after I get that in. I decided to check my oil hole before I got out of here, and I'm glad that I did because it just dead ends right in there into that nut. So I'm gonna drill a hole through that nut, and I may have to bring the nut back out and make for burrs on the inside, but I need to be able to have oil going through there, so I'm gonna drill a little oil access hole. Okay, when I looked down in there, I thought I could see a crack where the two nuts met off to this angle, so I drilled over at that angle, and I think I got it just right. If I put that probe through there, and then we look, it came out in the gap between the two nuts, so it did not take out a thread. So I blasted out with the WD-40 under pressure to get any brass fragments cleared out, and I think I've got that all clean. Okay, I've got the X lead screw, and I've got the nuts for that. I'm gonna slide them down in here. I wire weld them just a little bit. I don't really have a good way to measure how good those teeth are in there. That might be something that has to be replaced later. Looking at the threads on the lead screw, back here, say 75,000, and in there, maybe 61. So maybe 10 to about 15,000, and I think the other one might have been 15,000 as well of wear in the middle. Okay, that fought me going in there. I had to take this old piece of brass and hammer it in there with my soft blow, and then, you know, take my wooden stick and hammer it after that. And I looked and I couldn't see any burrs, so I don't know what the problem is. Now, if you look in there, this probe, which is going through the oil, comes out right beside that gap in that nut. So hopefully this other one, when it goes in, will leave a bit of a gap. If not, I'll have to just open it up. All right, I'm gonna get the second one in, and I'm guessing I'm gonna have to persuade that one as well. Of course, that one goes in easy. Well, all right, now I gotta see if I can get the threads so that the threads are lined up with the gap just right. I'll put that on time lapse. Okay, I don't remember now how I did this other one. I've got the first nut in here for the x-axis, and now I need to slide this one in, and it's got a mate. And I first tried it so that I could see exactly two threads, and that did not go in far enough. So now I'm going to make it so I can see just one thread. And actually it'll be one thread in the start, right at the start of the other one. And let's see how those two go together. They mated okay, but then when I go to put in this retaining screw, it wasn't countersunk. You see, it's supposed to be down below the level like that. And so I think that's correct. Although I suspect this is actually not going to be right either. Let's try. No, that's going to have that head sticking up too high. So I think I've got to advance that nut one more thread before putting it in there. So I have to back it out until it disengages from the first nut. Well, it looks like it disengages from both of them. So I'll get this one out. Okay, so before I had it where I could see one thread in the beginning of the other one. So now I'm going to back it out one more thread and try putting it in like that. I guess you're probably supposed to put these on here on the thread and insert them both in as a unit. All right. I think this head is somehow bent because it's rubbing up against the sidewall. It's loose there, and then it gets tight again. It gets loose. I'm gonna go use my sander and reduce the diameter on this screw head a little bit so it moves freely in here, or more freely, because I feel like I'm not gonna be able to tension the nut when I can't feel it because it's rubbing against the sidewall. I'll be back. I used my little mini lathe, and it took out only on one side because it was an intermittent cut. So let's see if hopefully it just got the eccentric part. Nope, it's still binding. I'm gonna take some more off. Okay, used the mini lathe to reduce the diameter of the head. Took a couple tries, but now it's going in. and not binding against that side wall. So it can kind of come down and press up against that screw, squishing the two nuts closer, taking out. So I got that much backlash that I can just even feel. So obviously that's got to change. There is still just a little bit of backlash, and I wonder if those two nuts are so close together that they can't collapse anymore. Let me look and see if there's any space between them through this oil hole. Yeah, those two nuts are right up against each other. So I think I'm going to take this outer nut out, and I'm just going to face it off and just make it a little bit shorter so that the two can squish in better. So I tried a different way, which is where I set the depth of where I thought the screw head was supposed to be. In other words, just slightly proud of the other layer. That lets this thing, the retention screw, put some tension on it. And then I advanced it here, making sure to keep the surface of the nut up against the head. So putting pressure this way on the screw and going in. But the problem is that when it gets to the second nut, it's not clocked right. So it has to be in, intervals of the thread pitch here. And so I either have to back this out further. Let's see if that would work. Back that further and then see if I can get into the second nut. Actually, that does work. Okay. And look in my hole. Let's see. Yeah, there is a gap between those now. So that is just a little bit more proud than the other one was. Okay, so let's get them through both. Again, I did not do any sort of machining on the nut like I was talking about just a minute ago. Decided I didn't want to do that. So now let's try tightening it down. Yeah, so there I've got room to adjust. I think that'll be good, because if I can do it with my hand here, I'll be able to really do it with a crank. Okay, so I think that feels good and tight. Now we back them both out and get it mounted back in the machine. And I do not have to put any sort of a drill through the nut on that one. I may play with this one. This one may need to come out one thread worth as well. I decided to take this nut out while I was here. Right there, that's where the oil got cut, and it's just on the flange of that nut, not on any of the threads. All right, so now what I'm gonna try to do is to put this nut in and have a bigger gap like I did on the other side. So when I have a gap, this nut is proud of this surface here, which I initially didn't think was the right thing to do, but now I do, because otherwise they're just butt up against each other. So I had to actually, this nut was fighting me a little bit. I had to use my soft blow to get it in there. And then I screwed through this nut, and then it got in, and it was not clocked right to get into the second nut. So I had to just take a wooden dowel and just keep driving it back little bit by little bit until finally now it will go through both of them. But this will now have a gap between the two, which I can then tighten up against to take out any backlash. So I think that's the right thing to do. All right, let's get my nut in. Boy, it sure doesn't seem right though, does it? Look how far it's sticking out. Let me think about this. Okay, when I look at this, this is a little bit too high. The distance between two threads is essentially 195 thousandths. If I come in 195 thousandths on here, I'm gonna be just below the surface. And when I look in there, I've got a huge gap, like 500 thousandths. So I think this needs to go in more by at least one thread's worth. Okay, this nut was really fighting me. I was having to hammer it in and then hammer it back out, and I'm like, that's not gonna work, because I need it to slide so that when I'm doing my tensioning, I can tell where it's tense and not just fighting the nut. So I put this in my little mini lathe, used some sandpaper, just polished it up, and now it slides in there just very nicely. Still still really good fit. All right, now we're gonna wanna be not all the way in there, but we're gonna wanna be one thread out. So there's one thread gap in there, and that's gonna be just below the surface, I believe. So I can have my finger in there, I can feel the gap. It's now getting close to the other nut, and then it just pushed back a little bit. Let's see, if I took that out and then went back one nut and went in, I think that leads us back to there not being any gap at all between the two. So I think I will make that out one thread. There we go. I really don't like that because it's just barely below the surface, which means that head of that tensioning nut's going to be just sitting way out there. Let me see if I could take some off the face of this. It really would not make any difference on it. All right, I'm going to take off one thread amount. Let me think about this. Okay, I think I've got it. I ended up taking off only 150 thousandths off of that end because I decided it didn't have to be an even multiple of the pitch. It just had to be a little bit deeper for that screw to kind of have ability to sit down in that seat, in that well here. I'll show you just a second. So now it slides nicely and I'll show you how I can take out the backlash. I've got it in there. You can see about how far down it is below that surface. Takes this head down at least halfway in. And then if I just kind of loosely turn this with my hand and then I tighten this tensioning screw, I can get it so I can no longer turn it with my hand. So I'm taking out the backlash on that, and that looks good. Okay, so on both of these, you notice here, there's movement there, and there's movement here. So I'm gonna put the screw in, and then as I get it engaged, then I'll pull back and then advance it, and it should just clock in directly to the second nut. Let me go get this put back in the carriage. My iPhone battery is running low, so I'm gonna speak loudly, have it where it can be plugged in. Okay, so I've started threading it, and then I pulled back so that the nut is all the way to the front. All right, and I'm into the second nut. Okay. All right, now I'm going to get that front gear on. I meant bearing. Let's get that bolted in. All right, then this ring goes in here, covering over those bearings. And then there's 3 screws that go in here, cap head bolts. And then my dial. And then well, that's a little rough. Let's see if I can clean up those threads a little bit. Yeah, I just took a little scribe, just kind of followed the threads inside, and that seemed to clean them up enough because it goes on there nicely now. All right, when I do this, and waiting till I can feel it move, I think there's about 9 thousandths of backlash, and that's without the tightening of that nut in there. And I probably was supposed to tighten that up before I put this on. So I'll have to decide if I'm happy with that. 9 thousandths isn't that bad. Thanks for Kevin here. As I was editing the video, I realized that the footage I was taking from across the room really wasn't showing how this whole part went back together. So I've come back to redo it and show you some more and better close-ups. I realized that as I've used this mill a little bit, I've developed some more backlash. So I'm gonna tighten that up further. You can see that I've taken off this front bearing housing. Okay, so there, I'm gonna tighten that up. And then I tighten up the tensioning screw there. Okay, we'll slide that. That's gotta be back enough that those plates can be there. Then, this bearing housing, I'm gonna push these bearings back in. I just tap those back in. This needs to go up onto this journal here, like that. And then, it's a little tight now. I'm thinking maybe it's gonna loosen up. I hope it loosens up, otherwise I may have gotten it too tight. And get into the point where we can get our set pins. Then put these cap head bolts in. Okay, so that bearing is all the way sat in there now. So now I need to put my bearing cap in with the flange inward. There's a helicopter going overhead. Okay, so this will retain and apply pressure on the outer aspect of the bearing, firmly attaching that to the housing or to the knee. Then we'll put this on, which is going to put, see, this will be outward, this is in. This is going to apply pressure on the inner aspect of the bearing. And that's going to, and the force on this is not coming from any sort of interaction with this plate. It's going to be the handle, which screws on here, will apply a force that way. It's going to prevent the screw from being able to slide inside those bearings. So then this is my dial indicator to show how far I've moved the y-axis. I got a little gnat flying around here driving me nuts. That screws on there. Then we will have the handle go on with the nut. So this is then forcing all of that unit up against the bearing. Boy, with that, I don't feel like I have any backlash at all. If I lock this table down, maybe 5 thousandths. It's nice and tight. So with all that, let's jump back into our timeline and just speed through the finishing up. I designed these little brackets to hold down the oil tubes. I'm printing out my first run now. We'll see how that fits. I also made another version that's just for one channel. Okay, I got these tubing holders mounted. I had to drill and tap that hole, but for this I'd already drilled holes for mounting the oil distribution block, and I was able to just go in on the other side of that. That worked okay, and those hold real nice. That part is done. Peace out. Boy, the wind's blowing. I don't know if it's gonna come through or not. I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, give it a thumbs up and likes, and come back for next time.